then I would like to say something once in hindsight of that the state mighty ones of the world are absolutely unskilled to create peace in a political way by the folks and in the whole world. The majority of these governors only kneel together and lead senseless conferences, however nothing valuable becomes spoken and undertaken for a creation of peace. Like at the climate conferences is the whole palaver of the world responsibility only sound and smoke, which fears nothing and brings no success, except million heavy expenses, which must become paid through the taxpayers. The might greed would permit it on a political path, thus in no kind of way, that peace can become created among the folks and in the whole world. Hence in my opinion for a peace creating, be it among the humans in general, like also among the folks and in regard upon a world peace, can only give a solution. And this solution can only be, that in primary line the humans become peaceful among one another and thus create peace. That the solution must thereto become carried further, that the humans who have been peaceful among one another toil themselves homogeneously up over the heads of the state mighty ones for the peace in the folks and also for the peaceful coalition with the other folks. That's the only way a world peace can become reached, because to the governors that is to the responsible state mighty one is the whole thing a useless and senseless undertaking through the political diplomatic machinations, while these namely aren't effective for real peace, rather they are only interested in exercising their might. Therefore the responsible state mighty ones lead also only disarmament conversations, which however don't strike the core of the issue, because in order to create peace are non-politically dishonest conversations essential, because principally there is so much more than only for the disarmament of weapons and weapon systems. Effectively it is not done with that, only to want peace and to profess a will for peace, like it also is not done with that, to reduce every defense, every weapon production, and every weapon system, because also then, if all these murder weapons become still so strongly reduced, it always signifies a war danger despite. And this, while there is sufficient squabblers and crazy ones, and therewith also lunatical and irresponsible people who are searching for war and might, who every time can release an armed encounter against an enemy. Peace is thus also not secured there, where the armament is only defensively installed and where desire for war is replaced with the concept, preparedness of defense. Because principally it is so, that where an army is located to hinder war, there is no peace, rather only a pseudo-peace, which can become unraveled any time into an effective war. Thus also a defensive army is also no guarantee of peace, rather bellicosely assessed, thus consequentially also the whole can become associated in this sense not with real peace, consequentially also a defensive state has achieved no advancement in regard to peace. Peace is first possible, if weapons and weapon systems must no longer serve as an enemy deterrent, rather only still as products of humanly consciousness of invention and as a means for all sorts of peaceful purposes. The used materials for weapons and weapon systems should however become fundamentally used for the fabrication of productive apparatuses, while the armies should be directed on that, to accomplish useful and valuable achievements of work for the well-being of the population and of the society. With that can very well also become pulled in relation that the weapons and weapon systems, which also have to be fabricated and worked out as apparatuses of work, in case of emergency also could become installed as weapons, for all cases, if any necessity for one such operation should come about. Thereby however the whole of the threat may not have to take its course in actions of civil war and tribal war. That however is not alone the way to the peace, because this requires firstly, that the human learns, to no longer lead wars, which he can however learn through, by which he toils himself in peaceful ways for true friendship and humanliness with his fellow humans as well as with the society and the folks. Peace creating can only be a conclusion of the 100-year-long painful learning process of the human among one another, because what originate from the politics, will always be condemned to failure, because what traditional monarchies, great powers, as well as small states in regard to peace creating undertake, are only political diplomatic and useless banter, which never lead to a real peace. And like said, alone a disarmament of armaments does not suffice, because in order to create an effective peace, are antecedently also freedom, righteousness, neighborly love, and the effective will for peace a prerequisite. However it may also not be, that a folk dominates, suppresses, or ever exploits the other and live on their costs. And also it may not be, that a folk exists on the inside of a class system, through which higher positioned ones suppress and exploit the others. Thus also in this relation great endeavors of solidarity and of the solidaric parts must become made, yet until that becomes reached by the terrestrial humanity, will it still last a very long time, whereby the mass of the overpopulation is guilty on that, because the more humans there are, they're more difficult and always the more unlikely will it be that the zeal of a peace among the humans and folks, not to mention a world peace, will be reached. Therefore is it so, that if the overpopulation does not drastically and rigorously become reduced, an effective peace will likewise remain an unfulfillable utopia among the humans and the folks, like also a world peace. So long as the human have something to eat and to drink and everything according to their requirements and wishes and everything is so, like it must become according to their opinion and their will, then they call after peace and carry empty great words by peace treaties. Yet if they all don't have that, which they want anymore and can no longer sustain, then they lead strife and war for that reason and fall into war with one another. In this moment is all sense and every word for peace forgotten, consequently darkness would fall over the consciousness of the human and they no longer have visions of peace. Their senses and observations and considerations is suddenly only directed still after blood, revenge, and retaliation, and they scream out their distressfulness full of anger, while they find that, even while they no longer have anything to eat and to drink and their requirements no longer become fulfilled, everything unright happens to them. The majority of the state mighty ones and the responsible heads of the upper echelon speak thereby then for the benefit of their right and take money and gifts for that as payment. Thus in this way always again and inevitably an end becomes set for the human peace, folk peace, and world peace, before it can also only come about. For the sake of the right of those which want to make every good and right, everything becomes responded to and lied about from the majority of the state mighty ones and their cooperators out to the folks with false political diplomacy and still more mealy dark armament, that the fortification would be able to warrant the peace. This lie, however, is only a lazy adaptation in the politics of the great powers and all those which mislead their surroundings and folks through lies of deadly disobedient ones, therewith dominated strife and discord, against which the mighty ons can send out their military and security forces with weapon gewalt. Thus the truth is, that the majority of the Gwaltij ones of the state grants to their folks only in the case of their subservientness protection and pseudo-peace. Instead of creating real peace, the majority of the leaders of the state only want to retain their place and visibly dominate over their folks and even over the whole world. They even lift themselves in self-aggrandizement to the world center, and indeed against the will of the folks, and thereby cause confusions of the folk. Subsequently the humans no longer know what they shall do or shall permit and what they shall understand as a lie or truth. However, the humans of all folks are trimmed for that matter since from ancient times through the mighty upper echelon, that they bury their own opinions, their reason, and their will and singly acknowledge the antecedent peace machinations of the world entities of government, who bilaterally invite themselves to supposedly release their conflicts. Worldwide they all palaver fruitless nonsense together in regard to weapon armament and weapon system armament, disarmament, and armament modification, yap about the disassembly of mercenary armies and war services, like also that a subsistence and peaceful cohabitation shall become enabled to all humans of womanly and manly gender. The truth, however, for that matter looks thereby, that nothing, purely even nothing becomes done from that and becomes transformed, while everything is only empty words, which become rambled about by idiotic gluttonous eating and binge drinking ones and without will to the reality. Such lying promises, which become made and become put on the table for the folks, require no clean politics, rather only dirty vulgarity and despicable misleading in regard to the folks through the majority of the might-searching ones of the state, by whom the minority has no chance to the correct creating pollution and governing ones, in order to penetrate and to put forward their good and correct objections in moments of guidance, to be able to really then silence. A concrete liberation from hunger, misery, and hardship is promised by the majority of the mighty ones of the state of all kind promise, however lyingly and slimly to the humans and folks, whereby however effectively nothing becomes done, while neither an essential birth stop nor a grasping worldwide birth control becomes addressed, silenced then carried out. This topic simply becomes swept under the table with dumb-damning talks of fighting hunger and help of development and so on, and through that the overpopulation grows further, and indeed including all evils going forth therefrom through the criminal crime-breaking machinations of the giant, and further to growing humanity. Lyingly and hypocritically promises become made by the majority of the unrighteous might-greedy ones of the leaders of the state opposite to the folks also of the peace in the own homeland and in all of the world. It become lied therefore, without really something becoming done for that the angst become fought through free willing and wholeheartedly relinquishment in weapons, weapon systems, and military, that a lasting unlearning of war actions become done through a radical new orientation and a life for one another and a life with one another with all essentials, whereto also belong a lasting peace. Yet everything is only sounds and smoke, because all folks go through the majority of mighty greedy governing ones, who are false and dishonest, their way, whereby much of the folk cheer for this majority of the might greedy ones of the state, they celebrate it and are dumb enough to give it belief. These dumb ones of the folks, which are believing of the upper echelon, look at their dependency on the major of the unright and unright creating politicians and governors as self-commitment and do not notice that they are only dumb promise recipients, promises kept to those with corporate money in regard to weak sensing talk of disarmament and lies following truth, which have no sort of value, while from that neither peace can originate nor hardship, misery, and hunger can become fought. Neither militaristic might mediums nor religious sectarian clarifications can rescue the earth humanity, if the right does not become done, namely through the implementation of a worldwide birth stop and of a subsequent rigorous birth control. The good and righteous religious and political authorities make obvious the will of disarmament in regard to the right representing for the folks, yet they become simply disrespected and talked about to death by the unright creating majority of the governing ones. Hope for a worldwide and lasting peace bases thus effectively in that the majority of the guilty ones of the state, the politicians, and governing ones, would hold themselves over justice and all until now self-inflicted enemies of peace recognize and turns around on his false course. A realistic hope of peace for the humans of the earth there is namely only there, where they position themselves to the self-caused catastrophes of their histories and recognize themselves as causers of unpeace and of all humanly and destructive trespassing, and all finally turn to the better and good and therewith to the true peace.
The abolishment of defense and of all weapons does not suffice alone, in order to create a lasting and effective peace. Peace implies, like you have said, also righteousness, like also that one folk does not dominate, suppress, exploit, or even plunders the other and live on his costs on the cost of the other folk. And like you have also said, may no class system on the inside of a folk be given. Every humanly society must be that kind, that all humans stand on same levels without differentiation, subsequently the one level does not suppress and does not exploit the others, like however also may not become dominated. It may only be a wise guidance, which however has to be correct and circumspective and encompassing lead all for the well-being of all. And with that I mean a leadership, which the folk, that is the folks lead and guide effectively in the sense of the value of concept lead, however does not stand over the people and regulate it. Regulating namely means in our sense, steer, and control, which expresses that in regard to the humans, these become steered and controlled according to the will of another human or even several others. There are actually by the whole terrestrial population still very great efforts of the democracy and of the solidarity as well as the solidaric parts are necessary, until a true peace as well as a real equality and equal rights is reached among all earth humans, and therewith also comes about in regard to woman and man. The always again guided promises through the terrestrial politicians and governments, that they would deploy themselves for the peace of the folks and their freedom, like also, that they have toiled about that, to demand the worldwide disarmament of the weapon and weapon systems as well as to use the retrofitting of weapons for peaceful, protecting, and securing purposes, guides truly only thereto, that primarily just war, revolting, and terroristic machinations occur. On the one side namely through that feel themselves defied through uproar willing, revolt willing, war willing, and collapse willing elements, now primarily just with bare weapons will want to alter everything according to their wicked will. On the other side however the weapon industry deludes itself to produce more than ever their weapon and weapon systems and to sell in lands, which last for these, while they therewith protect their dictatorial might and can retain it. And they want to do this, before real facts of the peace become created. Thus is also in regard to the weapon fabrication and weapon system fabrication a direct requirement, that the fabrication and the sale is forbidden for countries, which terrorize their own folk or carry out passages of arms against other lands. Thereby must the whole however also be directed thereon through a decree, that also privately only absolute integral persons may obtain and possess weapons, which represent no sort of dangers for the fellow humans. Alone already the threat, that this or that human shall become threatened with a weapon or even harmed or killed, and indeed no difference what he has done, has to be a reason for a weapon forbiddance, because humans, which express such threats, are uncalculable and absolutely irresponsible opposed to the life, consequentially no weapon belongs in their hands. Alone already a thought about it, to threaten, to harm, or to kill oneself or another human with a weapon, is irresponsible and criminal, and no weapon belongs in the hand of one such human. One weapon used against humans may only be responsible in absolute necessity for the protection of the own life or the life of another, and indeed also only deadly usage become used in the all-last emergency, if no other possibility exists. The worldwide motive of hope of the earth human in regard to the disarmament and modification of the weapons and weapon systems is absolutely fruitless, if a real peace is not created in the named frames from you and me, whereby in the first line the humans must create peace among one another, before a peace of the folks can become taken into account, and lastly before a world peace can become taken into account. So long as, however, still consciously the march up with the high-armed folks becomes driven and the majority of the state-responsible ones lead only great and dumb talks in regard to peace treaties, like also does nothing for a worldwide bid stop and an encompassing bird control, so long as peace treaties become lost in the sand. This on the one side, while they are not honestly meant by the majority of the politicians and governing ones, and on the other side, while the more humans that populate the earth, the more elements of rebelliousness, the dispeace, the revolting, and terroristic as well as that of war develop, which lastly leads to anarchy. And that alone already through that, while the earth human always becomes more relationshipless to his fellow humans as well as egotistical, conscienceless, and thought-feelingless, and always becomes more self-involved, which others may envy nothing more, and deteriorates into the stinginess. And this evil hinders everything together, that general peace can become among the earth humans, like however also around that, while everyone still only thinks and acts for himself, and neither real personal love nor neighborly love are at hand, and what still exists regarding this, atrophies always more. Therewith will every old stated healing promise, like this becomes preached by the unrealistic religions and sects, turns into laughability, and indeed not the least because of that, while these institutions only prattle on dumbly and requisitively, without instructing the humans, how and what they must learn, in order to really live according to the creation natural laws and recommendations. The religions and sects do not teach the humans that they must primarily create peace, freedom, and harmony in themselves, before they can also give these values further. Therewith also the fellow humans learn from that and can become peaceful, free, and harmonic and equalized in all their thoughts and feelings as well as in their actions and deeds. Already the old prophets and wise ones have taught that all war armor shall become smothered into something else and shall become made incapable of war. Therewith would indeed the total disarmament want, not however an absolute forbiddance of weapons, because the humans require these for the self-protection, if this should require the necessity, like they should usefully apply these weapons, however also as work tools. Thus became taught from ancient times, that the earth human shall therefore open his eyes and senses, that he correctly perceives and understands everything, therewith no revolts, wars, and no terror bring damage for the present and the future. The religions and sects, however, think since ancient times not for the future, rather only for the present, wherefore they bring no long-term teaching, like the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, does. And when that is so and religious sectarian becomes demanded from the human only for the instant and the present, without therewith a grasping teaching and magisterial direction being given for the controversial path, can also nothing become taught and the humans become given not for the future and the ways of behavior upon the path. And like you care to say, through the religions and sects in terms of learning only on empty straw becomes threshed, consequentially no single corn can become obtained. And therewith are you more than right, because the so-called teachings of the religions and sects correspond to no teaching, rather single empty threshed phrases and flowery phrases of a senseless kind, from which the earth human learns nothing, rather only can succumb to a delusional belief. That persists over all life, always a lifetime, because in regard to the religions and sects the humans become always again confronted with the same aspects of belief and delusion. Yet if the terrestrial gavolt ones of the state, the politicians, and governing ones always still rehearse and stir up the war, should the earth humans, as individuals and as a group, in order hammer home the way of the peace so clearly, therewith all murdering means of attack and all Ostjartetan weapon systems become beaten to pieces and annihilated. And this should have applied likewise for the occult, religious, and sectarian methods of self-security, through which the believers become led astray and harassed. Actually is namely, that also the religions become armed and prepared, and indeed with the false work of peace and word of peace, that alone shall become entrusted to God, which would allow the victory to come to the righteous in the war, and so on. Peace is only secured there where every armament and weapon jolt, like also every coercion and every other jolt, is defensively laid down, and no lust of war is at hand any more, and indeed also in regard to an accepted preparedness of protection, wherefore an army of defence is, yes, drawn up to hinder wars. Consequentially thus, despite the pure defensiveness, militant affectations are given. Where thus armies of defence exist, still long is no real peace reached. Consequentially the whole in regard to peace signifies no advance. Peace is effectively first possible when, where productive apparatuses have come from weapons, where there is no longer an army, which lead war or war of protection. First, where no human becomes taught any more to lead wars, and where no human is the enemy of the other any more, can real peace come about.
The ancient promise of peace, which become always proclaimed again and according to which all folks upon the earth search in hope that it may finally come about, is still completely unfulfilled. The folks and their guilty ones of the state still think up until today in no kind and wise therein, to direct their decisions upon real peace. Thus the terrestrial population strides still along not the way, which for the change of the time from the year 1844 was promised to all, because against the leading hopes sadly everything developed itself in a contradictory wise. The humans of the earth use their weapons not as effective apparatuses of peace, rather like here and there for murder and manslaughter, because they don't stop learning the war and clarifying to the so-called enemies. Like here and there they are might searching and dictatorial, domination searching, and in their greed and uncalculable in their psychopathic moods. In the consequence of their greed of possession, greed of might, and greed of domination, they could not publicly avoid in the arbitration and in the adjustment with their decisions. As a result, they continually sharpen their swords, in order to behead their supposed enemies and to force them to the ground with evil guilt. The direction of the majority of the terrestrial humanity is however obvious, because for them there is up until now no alternative towards the task of the far-encompassing hostility among one another. As a result also the majority of the mighty ones of the state and the politicians pot around in the same enmity of peace frame. Subsequently they all steer further in the direction upon the prepared position of modern weapons of annihilation of humanity, so likewise the majority of the mighty ones of the government, of the politicians, and of the general humanity itself. The working towards upon international right agreements towards the disarmament and to the peace becomes indeed always proclaimed as urgent, yet in this regard nothing valuable is really done, because if already something becomes reached, then become on one side only some weapon systems reduced in a minimal measure, while on the other side all supposed decisions of peace correspond to nothing different than a farce, while it deals thereby with only acts which seem like peace. And that is already so since ancient times, wherefore in the last 10,000 years only around 250 years of peace dominated upon the earth, however not in one stretch, rather up over the millennia each, while only in short months or weeks, during which no revolts and wars had dominated, which calculated together yields around 250 years. Every killing of humans is not counted and contradicts the creational natural laws and recommendations, be it in the form of the manslaughter, of the murder, through terrorism, religious fanatical machinations of all kind, through every form of revolt, and so on, or through penalty of death. Fundamentally it would fall to everything under murder, and indeed also armed self-protection. Thus the promise of peace must be among the humans and folks, and also in regard to the world peace to fulfill on guiltless ways, through reason and intellect, love, and neighborly love, good and positive interpersonal relations, friendships and enlightenments in regard to the creational nature laws and recommendations and their fulfillment. And with this teaching the universal prophet Nocodemion has already begun, and his descendant personalities, the prophets from his spirit-form lineage, have done the same, like also all wise ones, which have ever wandered over the earth. They all have at all times carried the humans of the earth up, as individual human in himself, like also among ones similar to them held peace together and announced this also to all folks and carried out in this. And if thus that becomes prepared prophetic, announcing consciousness and becomes carried out into the future, there would the humans of the earth learn, to understand the peace in its sense, that it can only be, that one far day real peace settles in every individual human, in all folks and into the whole world populations. If however the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life fruits nothing and therewith also the teaching of the peace, then the terrestrial humanity stands become a very bad and catastrophic future, while further too, all militant and terroristic evil brings all misery, all hardship, all pain, and depravity. This, what then namely further too, folk against folk will grasp the sword and war and terror will reign, if the humans of the earth do not transform their swords into plowshares and their lances into sickles, in order to therewith position the land peacefully. And that the arrival has become doubtful, if intellect and reason, love, peace, freedom, and harmony don't become finally created. And that will be so and become still much worse, that shows the current occurrences of this kind around the world, which from day to day become more brutal, inhumane, continually more expansive and numerous. And that happens especially because of that, what the humans upon the earth also through the overpopulation become more, which always ascertain more unconsciencelessly and feelinglessly massacre one another and treated like filth. Subsequently already for great masses of the overpopulation a human life is not worth more than a chanterelle mushroom. From that can every human convince himself, which is still skilled, to perceive and understand the reality and its effective truth, and indeed whether he is completely uneducated and is not skilled with speech, or whether he is educated and dominates the rhetoric. Actually is, then the three main religions Christianity, Islam, and Judaism have promised no folk-based or worldwide disarmament since ancient times, rather punishment and death through Ghoul, war, and preparedness for martyrdom, and that has sustained itself thus until the current time, whereby it naturally comes carried further in this way. And that happens through the majority of the mighty ones of the state and the politicians likewise like also through the religions and sects, also if they preach seemingly holy peace and love. Yet the bigotry has already been tradition since ancient times, while through that the humans and folks can become misled, oppressed, enslaved in terms of consciousness, and exploited in every thinkable bad kind and wise.
What you say is undeniable.